Okay, good morning everyone. I am here with you today to tackle the juvenile delinquency in juvenile justice system. First, we have here the historical background of juvenile delinquency and juvenile justice system. First, the Code of Hammurabi. Code of Hammurabi represents the earliest known comprehensive framework that societies use to regulate behavior and administer punishment for those minors. The Code of Hammurabi was the earliest written legal code that established strict rules and punishment for offenses, showing that even ancient societies held youths accountable for wrongdoings. For example, a child caught stealing livestock in ancient Babylon could face corporal punishment, reflecting society's strict accountability for youth. And then second, we have the 1641, the Stubborn Child Law. 1641 Stubborn Child Law was the first American law aimed to controlling juvenile behavior by allowing courts to punish disobedient and rebellious children. A disobedient child refusing to obey parents could be placed in a court-supervised correctional program. And then the Children-Only Law. The Children-Only Law introduced the idea that juveniles should be treated separately from adults in punishment and rehabilitation within the justice system. For example, a 12-year-old offender would be sent to a juvenile institution rather than an adult prison. And then 4, we have the 1961 Keating-Owen Act. The Keating-Owen Act protected children by restricting child labor and emphasized society's responsibility to safeguard the welfare of minors. For example, a factory employing children under 14 would be fined, protecting minors from hazardous labor. And then we have here the child saving movement. The child saving movement was a reform effort in the late 80s that pushed for protecting troubled youth and led to the creation of separate juvenile courts and institutions. For example, the reformers established separate juvenile reforms schools to provide education and rehabilitation instead of harsh punishment. And then second, we have the parents' patria. A parents' patriae is the patria or patriae. The parents' patriae is the legal doctrine allowing the state to act as a parent for children who are delinquent, neglected, or without a proper care. The state intervened to place neglected children into foster care or juvenile facilities for their protection. And then the 1880. 1880 is the first houses for refuge movement began in America, marking an early attempt to provide separate correctional institutions for juvenile offenders, or houses of refuge. For example, juveniles committing a petty theft were sent to a house of refuge for correction and education rather than jail. And then we have here the 1899. In 1899, the first official juvenile court was established in Cook County, Illinois, creating a separate justice system focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. For example, a 15-year-old delinquent was judged in a separate court designed for rehabilitation instead of adult sentencing. And then we have the medical model. The medical model views juvenile delinquency as a treatable condition caused by psychological or biological factors, emphasizing diagnosis, treatment, and rehabilitation over punishment. For example, a juvenile with aggressive behavior received therapy that counseling to address underlying psychological issues. And then we have here the significant cases concerning juvenile delinquency and reviewmanship. It established that jury trial is not a required part of suit process and the adjudication of the youth as delinquent by a juvenile court. First, we have here the Breed versus Jones. Breed versus Jones ruled that juveniles cannot be tried twice or the same offenses, expanding the constitutional protection against double jeopardy to minors. And then we have Kent versus United States. It established that juveniles must be given a due process rights when their cases are transferred to adult courts. And then the Henry Guilt 1967. It guaranteed juveniles important legal rights, including notice of charges, legal counsel, and the right to confront witnesses, transforming juvenile courts procedures to be more fair. And then we have here the American Bar Association in 1977. In 1977, the American Bar Association issued standards recommending fair procedures and stronger legal protections for juvenile and the justice system, helping shape modern juvenile courts practices. And then we have the Schall versus Martin 1984. The Schall versus Martin 1984 upheld the practice of preventive detention for juveniles, allowing courts to detain youth before trial if they were considered a risk to public safety or likely to flee. And then let's move to the module 2, entitled The Juvenile Delinquency. We have here first a basic concept of detentions. We have the juvenile. A juvenile is a young person who has not yet reached the legal age of adulthood. For example, a 13-year-old student involved in minor theft is legally considered a juvenile. Second, we have a delinquent. A delinquent is a minor who has been found guilty or violating the law or committing an offense. For example, a minor caught vandalizing public property is labeled a delinquent. Then, a juvenile delinquency. Juvenile delinquency refers to unlawful or antisocial behavior committed by minors. For example, a group of teens shoplifting is engaging in juvenile delinquency. And then we have a deviant behavior. Deviant behavior is any action that goes against accepted social norms, rules, or values. For example, a youth skipping schools repeatedly violates societal norms and demonstrates deviant behaviors. And then, a juvenile crime. A juvenile crime is an illegal act committed by a person under the age defined as juvenile by law. And then we have the status offenses. Status offenses are acts that only considered unlawful because the offender is a minor, such as truancy, running away, or underage drinking. Next, we proceed to the stages of delinquency. First, we have the emergence. The emergence stage is when early signs of misconduct first appear, usually through minor rule breaking or defiance. For example, a child begins lying to parents about homework. First we have the lying, and then the second we have the exploration. Exploration stage occurs when the youth actively experiments with delinquent behaviors to test limits and peer acceptance. For example, a teen experience with petty theft with friends. And then next, we have the explosion at the age of 13. Explosion stage is marked by a noticeable increase and escalation in delinquent acts, often becoming more frequent and serious. For example, the teen escalates to shoplifting regularly. And then we have the conflagration. The conflagration stage represents that the peak level of delinquency where criminal behavior becomes persistent, dangerous, and difficult to control. For example, the 10 engages in gang fights and serious theft. And then next, we go to the classification of delinquency. First of the classification delinquency, we have the unsocialized aggression. Unsocialized aggression involves aggressive and hostile behavior that occurs without close peer involvement or social group influence. And then next, we have the socialized delinquency. Socialized delinquency consists of criminal or antisocial acts committed as part of a peer group or gang that supports such behavior. And then next, we have the over-inhibited. Over-inhibited is expressed through hidden or suppressed impulse that eventually lead to sudden and extreme antisocial behavior. For example, a shy teen secretly vandalizes properties out of suppressed angers. Okay, next we have the pathway to delinquency. First, the authority conflict pathway. The authority conflict pathway begins early with unstubborn behavior and progresses into defiance and rule-breaking against authority figures. For example, refusing to follow school rules and escalating to truancy. And then we have the covert pathway. Covert pathway. The covert pathway is characterized by hidden acts such as lying, theft, and property damage that escalates over time. For example, a youth starts by lying, then stealing from neighbors. And then we have the overt pathway. The overt pathway involves direct, openly aggressive behaviors like bullying, fighting, and violent offenses. And then next, we have the types of delinquent youths. First, the socialized delinquent. Socialized delinquents engage in illegal or antisocial acts, mainly under peer influence and group pressure. And then next, the neurotic delinquents. Neurotic delinquents commit offenses due to underlying emotional instability or psychological conflict. For example, a child who have the anxiety and stress. A youth shoplifts due to anxiety and stress. And then next, we have the psychotic delinquents. Psychotic delinquents displays severe mental disorders that impair reality perception and contribute to criminal behavior. And then next, we have the sociopathic delinquents. Sociopathic delinquents. Sociopathic delinquents habitually violate social norms and laws with little or no remorse for their actions. For example, they habitually lying, stealing, and manipulating others without remorse. And then we move to the other classification of delinquents. First, we have the environmental delinquents. Environmental delinquents are influenced by poverty, family problems, or neighborhood conditions that foster delinquent behavior. For example, a teen influenced by gang activity in a high-crime neighborhood. And then second, we have the emotionally maladjusted delinquents. Emotionally maladjusted delinquents act out due to unresolved emotional conflicts or inability to cope with stress. For example, a teen reacts violently to minor family conflicts. And then we have the psychiatric delinquent. Psychiatric delinquents have diagnosable mental disorders that significantly affect their behavior and judgment. And then the occasional delinquents. Occasional delinquents commit minor offenses sporadically, often situational or opportunistic in nature. And then we have the maladjusted delinquents. Maladjusted delinquents consistently struggle to conform to social norms due to poor due to poor skills or personality issue. And then last, we have the gang delinquents. Gang delinquents engage in criminal activities as part of a peer group or gang that encourages antisocial behavior. And a gang. A gang is a group of individuals who band together for social identity, protection, or involvement in criminal activities. And second, the youth gang. A youth gang is a group of minors or adolescents who associate regularly and often engage in delinquent or antisocial behavior. And then we have here the characteristics of gangs. First, the organization. A gang have a structured system of rules and hierarchies that guide member behavior. And then next, leadership. Gangs typically have leaders who make decisions, enforce law, or enforce rules, and maintain control over members. And then next, the turf or territory. Gangs who claim and defend specific areas or neighborhoods as their territory. And then next, the cohesiveness. Cohesiveness is a gangs exhibit strong group loyalty, solidarity, and a sense of belonging among members. And then here, the gang suppression. The gang suppression refers to efforts by law enforcement and communities to reduce gang activity and prevent youth involvement. Okay, then we move to Module 3. First, here we have the supernatural theory. A supernatural theory explains delinquency as the result of evil spirits, witchcraft, or divine punishment influencing behavior. For example, a community believes a youth's misbehavior is caused by a witchcraft or what we call the demonic possession. And then we have the classical school theory. Classical school theory views individuals as rational beings who commit crimes after weighing the benefits and consequences of their action. And then we have the hedonism. Hedonism suggests that people are motivated by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, which can drive them towards delinquent acts. For example, a youth shoplifts for thrill and personal pleasures, or they can gain pleasures through shoplifts. And then we have the individual. For example, we have the general deterrence. Okay, let's move to the general deterrence. General deterrence aims to prevent crimes by making an example of offenders to discourage the general public from committing similar acts. For example, publicizing a tense conviction can deter others from stealing. And then the specific deterrence. It focuses on preventing a particular offender from reoffending by imposing a penalty or punishment. For example, a youth is given provision to prevent future crimes. And then we have the incapacitation. Incapacitation prevents crime by physically restricting offenders, such as through imprisonment or confinement. And then the retribution. A retribution is the concept of punishing offenders because they deserved it, as a form of moral or legal justice. And then we have the neoclassical school theory. Neoclassical school theory. The theory that modifies classical ideas by considering circumstances that may reduce a person's responsibility for a crime, such as age or mental capacity. For example, a 13-year-old offender receives a lighter sentence due to age and immaturity. And then we have the mitigating circumstances. Mitigating circumstances are the factors that lessen the severity or culpability of an offender's actions, potentially reducing punishments. And then let's move to the modern classical school theory. First, we have the rational choice theory. Rational choice theory suggests that individuals commit crimes after rationally evaluating risks, rewards, and opportunities. For example, a 10 chooses not to vandalize because they fear punishment. And then next, we have the routine activity theory. Routine activity theories argues that crime occurs when a motivated offender, a suitable target, and the absence of capable guardians convenes in time and space. For example, a vacant house without security attracts a youth to attempt burglary. And then we move to the biological and psychological theories. First, Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution influenced early biological perspective on delinquency, suggesting that some behaviors might be inherited or shaped by voluntary traits, evolutionary traits. And then we have the scientific study of crime. The scientific study of crime uses systematic observation, measurement, and analysis to understand causes and patterns of criminal behavior. And then next we have the biological theories. These theories argues that delinquency may be influenced by genetic, neurological, or psychological factors. Physiological factors. And then next we have the criminal anthropometry by Cesar Lombroso. He was the first to connect crime to human evolution. Criminal anthropometry studies physical features of individuals to identify traits associated with criminal tendencies. For example, and historically, a person with certain facial features was believed more prone to theft. And then next we have the physiognomy. Physiognomy refers to the abnormalities in body structure or appearance that were historically linked to criminal behavior. And then we have the phrenology. Phrenology is the study of skull, shape, and bumps to predict personality traits and criminal tendencies. And then we move to body type and crime. The body types of crime theory suggest that certain physical builds are associated with tendencies towards specific types of delinquency. First, we have the endomorph. Endomorphs are soft, round-bodied individuals who are typically seen as sociable and relaxed, with lower associations with crime. And then next, we have the Vesirotonia. Vesirotonia refers to an endomorphic personality characterized by comfort-seeking, social, and relaxed behavior. And then next, we have the mesomorph. Mesomorph are those muscular, athletic individuals often associated with assertive, aggressive, and risk-taking behaviors. And then next, the ectomorph. Ectomorph are those then fragile individuals, typically introverted, sensitive, and less prone to criminal aggression. And then we move to the heredity of crime. First, we have the IQ and delinquency. Its studies on IQ and delinquency examine the correlation between lower intelligence and higher risk of engaging in criminal behavior. And next, the historical studies. we have the Henry Goddard or the Kalikak family, for example. In historical studies, trace familial and hereditary patterns to explore the influence of genetics on delinquency and crime. Okay, and now we move to Module 5. Okay. Here it titles the theories of crime and delinquency, psychoanalytical, behavioral, cultural deviance, strains and social control, labeling, and conflict theory. Okay, first we go to the psychological theories. First, these theories assume that delinquency is a result of internal underlying disturbances. Okay, it explains delinquency as the result of individual mental processes, personality traits, or emotional disturbances. For example, a teen steals because of unresolved childhood conflicts. Okay, and then we move to the psychoanalytical theory. Psychoanalytical theory, it proposed by Freud, that attributes delinquent behavior to unresolved unconscious conflicts and childhood experiences. Okay, we have here the id. The id represents the instinctive, pleasure-seeking part of the personality that demands immediate gratification. And then we have the ego. The ego mediates between the id and reality, making rational decisions to satisfy needs appropriately. And then the superego came. The superego is the moral component of personality, reflecting internalized societal rules and conscience. To give an example, id drives a teen to seek immediate pleasure by stealing, and then ego mediates, and then superego creates the guilt. And then we move to the behavioral theory and delinquency. First, we have B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner emphasizes that behavior, including delinquency, is learned through reinforcement, punishment, and environmental conditioning. Or, for example, a youth learns that lying avoids punishment, reinforcing deceptive behavior. And then we have Albert Bandura. Albert Bandura proposed that delinquent behavior is learned through observation, imitation, and modeling of others' actions. Okay, for example, a teen mimics violent behavior seen in older siblings or media. And then we move to social class theories. First, we have the culture defiance theory. Culture defiance theory argues that delinquency arises when a youth adopts the norms and values of a subculture that conflict with a mainstream society. For example, teens in a gang adapt the gang's norms that condone theft. And then next, we have the Neighborhoods and Delinquency by Clifford Shawn and Henry Mackay blames delinquency on the neighborhood where a child lives. Okay, they found that delinquency is more prevalent in socially disorganized neighborhoods with poverty, residential instability, and weak community controls. Okay, for example, a child grows up in a poor, unstable neighborhood with frequent crime exposure. And then we move to the differential association theory or social learning theory. Okay, Edwin Sutherland. Okay, in differential association theory, Edwin Sutherland composed that delinquency is learned by associating with others who encourage criminal behavior. For example, a 10 learns shoplifting techniques from older friends or their close friends. Okay, and then the strain theories. Strain theories explain delinquency as the result of pressure or frustration when individuals cannot achieve societal goals and through legitimate means. And then we have Robert Merton's strain theory. Merton's strain theory states that crime occurs when people experience a gap between cultural goals and the means available to achieve them. And then Merton suggests 5 adaptations to this dilemma. First, we have the innovation. Individuals who accept societal approved goals. Innovation occurs when individuals use illegitimate or criminal means to achieve accepted goals. Then second, we have the retreatism. Retreatism describes those who reject both societal goals and the means, often withdrawing from societal. And then next, the ritualism. Ritualism is when individuals follow rules and norms rigidly, even if they abandon the pursuit of societal goals. And then the conformity. Conformity occurs when people accept societal goals and pursue them through legitimate means. And then last, the rebellion. Rebellion involves rejecting existing societal goals and means while creating new ones. And then we move to Albert Cohen's strain theory. Albert Cohen's strain theories emphasizes or published or emphasizes that delinquency often arises among lower class youths who feel blocked from achieving middle class success, leading to status frustration and defiant behavior. And then we have here the 3 types of delinquent gangs by Cloward and Ohen's type of delinquent gangs. We have here the criminal gang. The criminal gangs focus on organized illegal activities to gain money or material rewards. And then 2, we have the conflict or the violent gang. A conflict or violent gangs gain respect and status through aggression, fighting, and intimidation. And then 3, we have the retrietist gang. The retrietist gang consists of members who withdraw from both conventional society and organized crime, often using drugs or alcohol. Okay, we have here Robert Agnew's strain theories. First, we have the failure to achieve positively valid goals. Failure to achieve positively valid goals. In Agnew's strain theory, it explains there the delinquency as a response to negative experience and pressures that create frustration or strain. And then we have denial of previously attained achievements. Denial of previously attained achievement strain arises when individuals lost achievements or benefits they once had. It can cause them a frustration. And then we have the exposure to. We have here the exposure to negative stimuli. Next, the exposure to negative stimuli. The negative experiences such as abuse, neglect, or harsh environments increase the likelihood of delinquent behavior. And then we have here the techniques of neutralization. The techniques of neutralization. We have here the denial of responsibility. The denial of responsibility, offenders claim their behavior was caused by force beyond their control. And then next, we have the denial of injury. Okay, the denial of injury. The denial of injury, the offenders here argue that no one was really harmed by their actions. And then the denial of victim. The denial of victim, the offenders claim the victim deserved the harm or provoked the act first. And then the condemnation of the condemners. The condemnation of the condemners, offenders shift blame onto others who disapprove of their behavior. And then we have the appeal to higher loyalty. Appeal to higher loyalty. Offenders justify their actions as serving a higher purpose or group loyalty. And then we have here Travis Hershey social control theory. Hershey's theory suggests that strong bonds to family, school, and society prevent juveniles from engaging in delinquency. One, we have the attachment. The attachment refers to the emotional bonds and connections a youth has with their parents, teachers, and peers that discourage delinquency. And then we have the commitment. Commitment is irrational. It's the investment a youth has in conventional goals, such as education or career, which motivates law-abiding behaviors. And then we have the involvement. Involvement is the participation in conventional activities that keeps juveniles occupied and reduces opportunities for delinquency. And then we have the belief. Belief is the acceptance of society's rules, laws, and moral standards that guide behavior and prevent rule breaking. And then we move to the labeling and conflict theory. We have here Frank Tannenbaum labeling theory. Frank Tannenbaum labeling theory emphasizes that tagging youth as delinquents can reinforce criminal behavior and lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then Edwin Limmerf. Edwin Limmerf distinguished between primary defiance, acts as secondary defiance, and the behavior resulting from being labeled. And then Howard Beaker. Howard Beaker argued that defiance is not inherent in the act but results from society labeling certain behaviors as unacceptable. And then the conflict theory. Conflict theory views delinquency as a result of social and economic inequalities, where laws reflect that the interests of powerful groups while marginalized youths are more likely to be criminalized. And then we move to Module 6. It titles The Female Delinquency Theories. First, we have the biological and psychological theories, the Lombroso and Ferrero's atavistic girl. Lombroso and Ferrero suggested that some delinquent girls are atavistic, meaning they inherent privative or criminal traits. They believe these biological predispositions made certain females more likely to engage in crime. And then we have Freud's inferior girl. Freud views girl as psychologically weaker or inferior compared to girls. He argued that this perceived inferiority made them more susceptible to delinquent behaviors. And then we have Thomas's unadjusted girl. Thomas described delinquent girls as unadjusted individuals struggling to meet societal expectations. Their inability to confirm the norms often lead them into antisocial or criminal acts. And then Pollack's deceitful girls. Pollack argued that girls are naturally more secretive and manipulative than boys. this tendency can hide their delinquent behaviors from authorities on societals and society. And then Marxist feminist theory. Marxist feminist theory linked female delinquency to social and economic inequalities. They argue that oppression and exploitation and capitalist system push some women and girls toward crime. And then differential oppression theory. Differential oppression theory suggests that girls commit crimes in response to patriarchal pressures and societal control. A gender-based discrimination and expression can create circumstances that lead to delinquency. And then we move to Module 7. It titles The Factors and Causes of Juvenile Delinquency. First, we have here the family factors. Family factors include those poor parenting, the lack of supervision, the abuse, neglect, or broken homes. Dysfunctional family environments can increase the likelihood of juvenile delinquency. For example, 10 rebels and steals due to neglectful parenting. And then next we have peer influence. Peer can strongly affect a youth's behavior, especially when associating with delinquent friends. Peer pressure often encourages rule breaking and antisocial activities. For example, the youth starts vandalizing after joining a group or their delinquent friends. And then we move to socioeconomic factors. Socioeconomic factors, poverty, unemployment, and limited access to education create conditions that increase juvenile crime. Economic hardship can push youths toward illegal means to meet their needs or gain status. For example, poverty drives a teen to steal or to steal stolen goods for income. And then school factors. School factors, the law academic management and their performance. Then the dropout, the truancy, the exposure to the violence and bullying. And then next we have the individual factors. Individual factors refers to personality traits, impulsiveness, low self-control, or mental health issues. A certain personal characteristics may make juvenile more prone to committing offenses. And then last but not the least, we have the community and environmental factors. Community and the environmental factors involve neighborhood disorganization, a high crime rates, and lack of recreational facilities. And unsafe or unsupportive environment can increase opportunity and pressure to delinquency. And that ends my discussion. Thank you for listening. Okay, and now we are going to discuss the question document examination. First, we go to lesson 1 titled The Documents. A general definition of terms. Okay, document. What is document? Document is any material containing marks, symbols, or signs either visible, partially visible that may present or ultimately convey a meaning to someone. And questioned. What is questioned? Questioned means that something is being examined or doubted or challenged to see if it is true, authentic, or a valid. And then next we have question document. Question document is a document whose authenticity, the origin, or the content is being examined or doubted. And then the disputed document. What is disputed document? Disputed document is related to a question document. How it is related? A disputed document is often the same as a question document. it is being challenged or doubted. And then standard or the standard document. A standard document, how does a standard document relate to the documents? A standard document is an authentic document used to compare a questioned document to verify its authenticity. And then exemplar. By a term by some document examiners and attorneys, exemplar is a known authentic document used as a reference to examine a questioned document. And then holographic document. Holographic document. A holographic document is a handwritten by its creator, and if questioned, is examined to verify handwriting and the authenticity of it. And then the reference collection. Reference collection. A reference collection is a set of authentic documents used to compare and verify a questioned document. And then we go to the kinds of document. One, we have the public document. Okay, public document. What is public document? Public document is a document that anyone can read or access. That is the kind of document. Next, we have official document. Okay, what is official document? Official document is a document issued or authorized by the government or other official authority. And private document. Private document is owned by a person or private organization and not for public use. And then commercial document. Commercial document is a document related to business, trade, or financial transactions. And then electronic document. Electronic document is a created, stored, or shared using a computer or digital devices. And we move to lesson 2. Okay. The historical development of writings. Number 1, we have paper. Paper is a then material used for writing. Paper is interlaced sheets of fibers, usually cellulose fibers from plants, but sometimes from rags, cloth, or other fibrous materials. Paper can be used for writing, drawing, or paintings. And then next we have papyrus. Papyrus is a soft, spongy tissue of the stem. It is used to people of Egypt, Palestine, Syria, and Southern Europe. And then next we have the parchment. A parchment is a writing material made from a skin of animals used before modern paper. And then the vellum. A writing materials came from skins from young calves. And then next we have Cai Lun, a Chinese man and court officials. He was the first to succeed to make a paper from vegetables, fibers, tree barks, rags, old fish, and the nettings of it. And in writing instrument, we have pen. Okay, a pen is a tool used, of course, to apply ink to a writing surface. And then the pen nibs. Pen nibs are the pointed tips of pens used to control the flow of your ink. And then we go to the historical background of pens. First, we have the reed pens or swamp reed. Okay. It comes from a water geese, graces, found in Egypt, Armenia, and along the shores of the Persian Gulf were prepared by leaving them under the hops for several months. It was a writing tools that had a writing and slightly frayed like a brush. And then next we have a quill pen. A quill pen's made from bird feathers, used for writing by dipping it in the pen in ink, or your quill pens. And next we have the steel point pens. Pens with metal tips used for more durable and precise writing. And then next, the fountain pens. Fountain pens in 1884, Louis Watermark, a New York insurance agent, patented the first practical fountain pen. Okay, the fountain pens with internal reservoirs to hold ink, allowing continuous writings. And then the ballpoint pens came. Ballpoint pens by John Loud. Okay, ballpoint pens with a rolling ball that dispenses ink smoothly. That's what we are using right now in this modern era. And then next we have a fiber tip pens. Okay, fiber tip pens. It's a pens with fiber tips. And then sometimes it calls a felt tip pens used for smooth colored writing. And then next we have a felt tip markers. Markers with felt tips used for bold writing or drawing. And then next, the ink. Okay, ink and its type. Ink is a liquid substance that used for writing, drawing, or painting. And first we have the India ink. Okay, India ink is a black ink made from carbon or soot used for writing and drawing. And then next, the iron gallo tannate ink. It is a historical ink made from iron salts and the tannic acids used for durable writing. And then next, we have the logwood inks. Logwood inks. It contains potassium chromate and saturated logwood used. It is a ink made from logwood, often purple or black in color. And then next we have the indelible ink. Ink that cannot be easily erased or removed. Even when removed by water, it cannot easily remove. And then next, the copying ink. Similar to writing inks and composition, but in addition contains small amounts of a glycerin or sugar, so it's sweet, I think. And then the copying ink is used to make copies of documents. And then next, the secret ink or the invisible inks. Okay, this ink is invisible until treated or exposed to heat or chemicals. A water-resistant writing and a drawing ink that does not wash away in water. And then next we go to the alphabet. Okay, first the iconographs. Okay, iconographs is a symbol or picture that represents an object or idea. And then next, the ideographs. The ideographs is a symbol that represents an idea or concept rather than a word. And then next, the pictographic writing. Okay, pictographic writing is a writing using pictures to represent words or ideas, or symbols and forms. And then the cuneiform, an ancient writing system using wedge-shaped marks on clay tables. It's a coin to mean wedge shape, considered as the oldest form of writing. Okay, and now we move to lesson 3, titled Various Aspects of Question Document Examination and Specific Method in the Examination of Question Documents. And then we move to the module or lesson 3, titled The Various Aspects of Question Document Examinations and Scientific Methods in the Examination of Question Document. First, we will tackle the various aspects of question document examination, where the examination of handwriting, and the miscellaneous aspects such as detection of alterations and decipherment of erased writings, and then the restoration of the obliterated writing, and then determination of age of documents, how old it is, and then identification of some stamps, sale, and other authenticating devices, and then currency bills and coins and the like. And then first we go to the holographic will. Okay, holographic will. What is a holographic will? A holographic will is a will entirely handwritten and signed by the person who is making it. And then next we have the notarial will. A notarial will is a will prepared and authenticated by a notary or a legal officer. And then we go to a technical terms of divisions of question document examination. First we have the addition, but first the examination of question documents is divided into technical and scientific aspects to verify authenticity and detect alterations. First we have the addition. The addition is a writing added to a document after its initial creation, after the original's preparation, any matter made. And then we have the conclusion. The conclusion is the decision or judgment made by the examiner after analyzing the document or a document. And then next, the document examiner. It's a specialist who studies question documents to determine authenticity or forgery. And then next we have the erasure. Erasure is the removal or the deletion of writing from a document. And then next we have the examination. Examination is the careful inspection of a document to detect authenticity or it has a tampering. And then next, the expert witness. It's a specialist called to court to give professional opinions on question documents. And then the insertion or interlineation. Interlineation. It's a words or letters added between the lines of a document. It's called insertion. And then the non-identification or non-identify or identity. Okay, the non-identification is the inability to determine the author or source of a document. And then we have the obliteration. Obliteration is the act of erasing, blotting, or destroying part of a document. And then next, the opinion. Opinion is the professional view of a document examiner regarding authenticity or forgery. And then last is the qualification. It's the expertise of certification held by a document examiner. And then we have the scientific method and questioning document examination. The method of the ACE-V methodology. The ACE-V methodology is the scientific method in which it is the identification of question documents, specifically in the identification of handwriting. Okay, first we have the A in the ACE-V. A stands for the analysis or recognition, the identifying and studying the characteristics of a document. And the next, the C, we have the comparison or a comparison. Comparing the question document with known or the original or the standard document. And then next we have the evaluation. Evaluation is the assessing similarities or differences to form a conclusion. And then the verification, confirming findings through repeated testing or cross-checking of the document. And then we move to the scientific examination of document. there is a criteria. First, we have the accuracy. Accuracy is the correctness of the result and document examination. And then second, the precision. Precision is the consistency and reliability of the findings and document examination. And then now we're moving to the lesson 5, titled Techniques and the Examination of Question Documents. First, in the techniques of the examination document, question documents, we have the microscopic examination. Okay, what is microscopic examination? A microscopic examination, it's a using of a microscope to study fine details in a document, such as handwriting, the ink used of it, and then a paper or what kind of fibers used of it. And then next we have the transmitted light examination. Okay, transmitted light examination is a shining light through the document to detect alterations, or it has a watermarks or the hidden features of the document. And then next we have the oblique light examinations. Okay, oblique light examinations is the using of light at an angle to reveal indentations, erasures, or surface irregularities. And then the photographic examination. Okay, photographic examination is the making detailed photographs to document or analyze features of the document. And then next we have the ultraviolet examination. Okay, ultraviolet examination is the using ultraviolet, or what we call UV lights, to detect changes, hidden writings, or a certain inks that react to UV or the UV light. Okay, and then we have the infrared examination. Okay, infrared examination is the using of infrared light to reveal differences in ink or alterations not visible to the naked eye. So that's why we will use the infrared examination. And then we will go to the miscellaneous examinations. Okay, miscellaneous examinations or other special methods used depending on the types of documents or the suspected alteration. Then we have first the erasures. Okay, erasures, one of the common inquiries and techniques or question documents. Okay, erasure is the studying areas where the writing has been erased or removed to detect tampering. And the next we have the indented writing. Okay, indented writing is to detect the impressions left on the paper when writing was done on sheets above it. And then next we have the burned or the charred paper. It is the examining partially burned or damaged documents to recover the writing. And then it is not actually burned to fire, burned to ashes. It's just like some kind it turned black something. There have a part of it that turned to black. So that's why we were using this kind of examining. And then the adding machine. It is the studying numbers or calculations recorded by mechanical or electronic adding machines for authenticity or tampering. And then we move to the lesson 6, titled Different Instrument and Apparatus Used in Question Document Examination. Okay, the instrument and apparatus used in question document examination. First, we have the magnifying lens. Okay, what is magnifying lens? Magnifying lens is used to enlarge small details on a document, and then it helps the examiner to see the writing strokes or the tiny alterations, even if how small it is. By the use of the magnifying lens, we can enlarge the small size of the writing strokes. And then second, we have the shadow graph. Okay, shadow graph. A shadow graph is a project that image of a document onto a screen, and then it allows the examiner to study the shapes, the letters, and the writing patterns carefully. And then next we have this stereoscopic binocular microscope. Okay, a stereoscopic binocular microscope. This is a scope that has two lenses for three-dimensional viewing, and it helps examine the surface of a document in detail. And then next we have the measures and test plates, or the transparent glass. The measures and test plates, these are used to compare letters, lines, or designs on documents. They help measure dimensions and detect differences or alterations in the document. And then we have the table lamps with adjustable shades, or the gooseneck lamps. Okay, the table lamps with adjustable shades, these lamps provide focus light for examining a document. The adjustable shades help control the light angle and intensity, where you can move the light where you like to find the details of the document. And then next, okay, we have the transmitted light gadget. Okay, what is transmitted light gadget? It is the kind of gadget that shines light through the document. It helps detect the watermarks, the indents, and then the hidden writings in the document. And then 7, we have the ultraviolet lamp, or this is the UV lamp. Okay, the UV lamp or the ultraviolet lamp is make certain things and substances visible that cannot be seen under some normal lights. They help find erasures, alterations, or a hidden writing. And then the infrared viewer. Infrared viewer is a viewer that uses infrared light to examine differences in ink. It can reveal overwriting or hidden alterations. And then next, we have the comparison microscope. Okay, comparison microscope. This microscope shows the two documents side by side for comparison. It helps detect differences in handwriting or print patterns. And then next, we have the video spectral comparator, or the VSC. Okay, the video spectral comparator. Okay, it is used in the examination of masked or obliterated text. These instruments analyzes documents under different light sources. It helps identifying inks, paper types, and alterations. And then next, we have the electrostatic detection apparatus, or the ISDA. And then electrostatic detection apparatus. This apparatus detects indented writings on a document. It reveals impressions made by writing on sheets above the question paper. And then last, we have the camera. Okay, a camera takes detailed photographs of a document. These photographs reserve evidence for analysis or court use. And we proceed to lesson 7, titled Procedures in the Utilization of the Equipment and Apparatus. Okay, first, the procedures in the utilization of the equipment and apparatus. The document examiners, they follow systematic procedures in utilizing the equipment and apparatus they are using, ensuring each tool is calibrated and it handled properly, and it using according to the standard of the forensic protocols. And this careful approach allows accurate analysis, measurement, and comparison of documents, maintaining the integrity of evidence throughout the examination process. And then the basic measuring tools. The basic measuring tools are instrument used to determine length, the width, and then the height or other dimensions of an object, often including rulers, the calipers, the micrometers, and measuring tapes. In document examination, these tools help accurately measure handwriting, the signatures, the spacing, and other critical features for the comparison and analysis. And then we have the document examiners. They use an extensive variety of magnification equipments. They use specialized authentication equipment to verify the genuineness of the documents. And then these tools help detect the forgeries and then the alterations or the counterfeit materials by analyzing inks, papers, the watermarks, and the other security features. And then for the light sources they use. Okay, the light sources are tools used by the document examiners to examine the document under the different types of illuminations. What is that? Such as ultraviolet, the infrared light, or the visible light they use to reveal the hidden features, the alterations, the watermarks, and the other details that are not visible under normal lighting conditions or just the naked eyes. And then for the special instrument that they use, okay, the document examiners also use special instruments that designed for detailed analysis, such as the infrared and ultraviolet lights, and the electrostatic detection devices, and spectral analyzers. These instruments help reveal hidden features, the alterations or forgeries that are not visible to the naked eye. And then the photography equipment. Okay, document examiners use photography equipment to capture the high resolution images of the documents for their detailed analysis, the comparison, and the record keeping. And then the computer equipment. Okay, they also use computer equipment for the digital analysis, such as the image enhancement, the database searches, and then storing or retrieving the electronic records securely. That's in the question document examination. Thank you for listening. And now we move on to our next topic, the professional conduct and ethical standards. First, we go to the lesson 1, titled The Introduction to Ethics and Values. First, we go to the history of ethics. First, we have the classical period. Okay, in classical period era, ethics focus on virtue and the good life, with thinkers like Socrates or Plato and Aristotle emphasizing character and human flourishing. And then next we have the Middle Ages. Okay, Middle Ages, ethics was grounded in Christian theology, with Augustine and Aquinas teaching morality as obedience to God and nature. Okay, in the early modern period, the philosophy that develops during the period are the following, like a shift from the supernatural from natural, temporal, and secular, then an attempt to balance the supernatural and the temporal, as many of the rises of the modern science, especially physics. And then the 19th century, utilitarianism, with the level of the greatest good and the greatest number. Okay, the ethical thought that emphasizes consequences, social development, and the critique of traditional morality throughout utilitarianism, Hegel and and then next we have the contemporary period. Okay, in contemporary period, modern ethics addresses pluralism, justice, and practical issues with thinkers like to exhibit a diversity of trends and moral beliefs for and against the scientific theory, a logical positivism, return of belief in a man, a sinful existentialism with its own diverse spokesman. And then we move to meta-ethics. Meta-ethics is the study that nature, meaning, and objectivity of moral concepts. And then the descriptive ethics. Okay, descriptive ethics examines how people actually behave and what moral beliefs exist in societies. And then the normative ethics. Okay, normative ethics prescribes that people ought to do through theories like virtue ethics, deontology, and consequentialism, and then the moral courses of action through practical means. And then the applied ethics. Applied ethics applies moral theories to real life issues such as medicine, business, and the environment. Okay, this branch tells us how we can achieve moral outcomes in a particular circumstances. And then the ethics and values. Okay, ethics is the study of right and wrong, while the values are the principles or standards that guide our behavior. And then a general definition of values. It is the values that are beliefs or ideals that influences the attitudes and actions. And then the properties of values. Okay, properties of values, we have the subjective. Okay, the values are subjective. These are values that are shaped by personal feelings and experiences. The next day, objective. Objective is a values that can exist independently of individual's opinion. And then the relative. The relative is a values that may differ across cultures and situations. Okay, next, the bipolar. The values are bipolar. Okay, bipolar is the values that have opposite extremes, such as honesty versus dishonesty. That refers to this means that values do not exist alone. They always exist with their counter values, thus values positive or negative. And then next, the hierarchical. These values are ranked in order of importance. When we say values are hierarchical, we do not classify values, but rather we rank them. When we rank values, we establish order of importance among them. The closest meaning of ranking values is prioritizing values. Okay, here are the difference versus values and ethics. Okay, ethics is the systematic study of what is right and wrong, while the value are the personal or cultural beliefs that shape our choices and behavior. Then next, we have the ethics and law. Okay, here, ethics is the systematic study of what is right and wrong, while the ethics deals with moral. We're talking now about the ethics and law, whereas the ethic deals with the moral principles and what people ought to do, while the law consists of rules enforced by the authority that must be followed regardless of the personal beliefs. And then now we move to the ethics and morality. Okay, ethics and morality. Ethics here is the philosophical reflection on moral principles, whereas the morality is the everyday practice of distinguishing right from wrong based on those principles. And then we move to the human acts and the acts of human. Okay, human acts are actions performed with knowledge and free will. reflecting a person's moral responsibility. And then the acts of human is acts of human are actions done instinctively or involuntary without moral awareness or deliberate actions or choice. Okay, in other words, the human acts is the voluntary actions, and then the acts of human is the involuntary action. And then we move to the empathy. The empathy and compassion in law enforcement. Okay, first we talk about the empathy. Okay, empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of other person. While in comparison is the concern for others' suffering that motivates a desire to help or alleviate it. And then the empathy and comparison in the law. Empathy and comparison in the law enforcement involves understanding and caring for others' situation while applying the law fairly and humanely. And next, we are going to tackle the lesson 2 titled The Rights and Duties. Okay, first we have the notion of rights. Okay, notion of rights. Notion of rights are legal, moral, or social entitlements that allow individuals to act or be treated in a certain way. And then next, we have these kinds of rights. First, the natural rights. Okay, natural rights are those rights inherited to human beings by virtue of their existence, such as life and liberty. And then the human rights. Human rights is the universal rights entitled to all people, regardless of your nationality, your race, or even your status. And then next, the civil rights. Okay, civil rights is the rights granted and protected by the law within a particular society, such as voting and equality before the law. And then the alienable and inalienable rights. Okay, the alienable rights can be transferred or surrendered, while the unalienable rights it's the rights that cannot be taken away or sold. And then next, we have the juridical and the non-juridical rights. Okay, the juridical and the non-juridical. Juridical rights are enforced by law. Okay, whereas the non-juridical rights exist morally or socially but may not be legally enforceable. Okay, and then the rights of jurisdiction. Okay, the rights of jurisdiction, it's the rights related to the authority of courts or governing bodies over persons or matters. And then civil and political rights. First, we talk about the civil rights. Okay, civil rights are rights that protect individuals' personal freedoms and equality before the law, and then the political rights are the rights that allow individuals to participate in governance. They allow us, for example, to run as a president, like that, and then such as voting and running for office. Yeah, and then next, the meaning of duty. Okay, what is duty? Okay, duty is a moral or legal obligation to perform or refrain from certain actions. That is the kind of duty. And then here is the kind of duty. First, we have a natural duties. Okay, natural duties. It is the duties that arise from human nature and moral principles such as honesty and fairness. And then the positive duties. Positive duties that are required taking action to help or benefit others. Okay, and next we have the affirmative duties. Okay, affirmative duties are to actively promote good or prevent harm. And then negative duties. The negative duties that are required refraining from harmful or wrongful actions. Okay, and then the Bill of Rights. The concept of a Bill of Rights. A Bill of Rights, otherwise known as the Charter of Liberty, And then Charter of Liberty. Charter of Liberty may be defined as the declaration and enumeration of a person's basic rights and the privileges which is the Constitution is designed to protect against violations by the governments. And the Article 3 of the 1987 Philippine Constitution provides the Bill of Rights, which is protecting of our rights, the protecting of our respect, our rights to have a peaceful life. Okay, the Bill of Rights, Article 3, it's all about protecting our rights as a human or as a people residing, for example, here in the Philippines. Okay, now we move to lesson 3, titled Human Rights and Ethics in the Law Enforcement Setting. Okay, first we have the principle of human rights. Okay, human rights are inherited and alienable and must be respected, protected, and fulfilled by all. And then we have here the universality. Human rights apply to every person everywhere, regardless of nationality, race, or status. And then we have the indivisibility. Okay, indivisibility is the all human rights, civil, political, economic, social, and cultural, are equally important and cannot be fully enjoyed in isolation. And then we have the interdependence. Okay, interdependence. The fulfillment of one human right often depends on the realization of others, as rights are interconnected and mutually reinforcing. Okay, we move to the ethical and legal conduct. Okay, ethical and legal conduct. Law enforcement officers must uphold both moral principles and legal standards in all actions. Human rights standards that require that all individuals are treated with dignity, respect, and equality, and that abuses are prevented. The human rights practice. In practice, officers must implement these standards and accountability in daily operations. And the command and supervisory officials that command and supervisors officials are responsible for ensuring that subordinates comply with human rights and standards, and they provide guidance, oversight, and enforcement of accountability. Okay, we go to human rights standards. Okay, human rights standard is the law enforcement officers must treat all individuals fairly and equally without bias based on race, religion, gender, social status, or other personal characteristics. Okay, they command and supervisory officials. They command the supervisor are responsible for ensuring that officers under their authority enforce the law impartially and uphold non-discrimination policies. Okay, next. Okay, now we move to the lesson 4 titled Ethical Issues in Dealing with the Victims of Crime and Suspects. Okay, first, the arrest. The human rights standards. Okay, an arrest must be lawful, based on probable cause, respect the suspect's dignity, inform thereof their rights, and avoid any form of torture, threats, or coercion. And then in detention and human rights standards. It must ensure human living conditions, access to food, water, medical care, communication with family and lawyers, and protection from physical or psychological abuse. Okay, and then the use of force and firearms and human rights standards. The use of firearms must follow the principles of necessity, proportionality, and legality, applied only as a last resort to protect life or prevent serious harms. Okay, and then we move to the ethical issues in dealing with crime and suspect are multifaceted and can arise the various stages of the criminal justice process. Here are some keys of the considerations. First, we have the presumption of innocence. Okay, every person should be considered innocent until proven guilt in a court of law. And then the fair treatment and due process. Okay, all people must be treated equally and legal procedures must be followed. And then next, the avoiding discrimination and bias. Officers must not show favoritism or prejudice based on race, religion, gender, or social status. And then next, we have the use of force restraint. Okay, force should not be used when necessary and must be proportional to the situation. And then the confidentiality and privacy. Okay, personal information of individuals must be protected and not disclosed without proper reason. And then the truthfulness and integrity. Okay, officers must always be honest, act ethically, and avoid corruption. Next, the balancing public safety and individual rights. Maintain safety in the community while respecting each other's legal and human rights. And then next, we have the professional responsibility. Okay, perform duties diligently, responsibly, and according to law and ethics. And then the accountability and oversight. Officers must answer for their actions and follow supervisions and regulations. Okay, the rights of the victim. First, we have the protection and safety. Okay, the protection and safety of the victims should be kept safe from further harm or threats. And the second, we have the support and assistance. Victims should receive emotional, medical, and legal help. And then next, we have the investigation and evidence collection. The authorities must investigate crimes properly and gather evidence fairly. And then empowerment and advocacy. Okay, empowerment and advocacy. The victims should be informed of their rights and have a voice in the process. And then we move to the suspect. First, the apprehension and arrest. Okay, a suspect can only be arrested based on legal grounds, and the arrest must follow proper procedures. And then the Miranda rights and due process. The suspect must be informed of their rights, such as the right to remain silent and have a lawyer, and must be treated fairly according to the law. And then we have the interrogation and questioning. Okay, the suspect must be questioned respectfully without threats, torture, coercion, or unfair pressure, and any confession must be voluntary. Okay, we next move to the Module 6 titled The Foundation of Police Force. We go to the foundation of police ethics. Okay, police ethics is about doing the right thing, following the law, and serving the public with honesty, fairness, and respect. And then we proceed to the 11 canons of police ethics. First, we have the primordial police responsibility. Okay, the primordial police responsibility. That is, the police must protect life, property, and maintain peace. And then next, we have the limitation of police authority. Okay, the limitation of police authority, that the police should use only the authority given by law. And then next, the knowledge of the law and other responsibility. The police must know the law and perform their duties correctly. Okay, use of power means to obtain proper ends. Police must achieve results in lawful and ethical ways. Okay, next, the cooperation with public officials. Okay, police should work with other officials for the public good. And then proper conduct and behavior. Police must behave respectfully and professionally at all times. And then the conduct towards the community. Okay, police must treat the community with courtesy, fairness, and respect. And then the conduct in arresting a law violator. The police must arrest suspect fairly without abuse and follow legal procedures. And then fairness in refusing gifts or favors. Police must refuse bribes or gifts that could affect their duty. And then attitude towards police profession. Okay, police should take pride in their work and uphold ethical standards. Next, the impartial presentation of evidence. And the police must report facts honestly without bias or distortion. And then we move to the professional police principles. First, we have the prevention of crime and disorder. Okay, police should work to prevent crime and maintain order. And then the next, the cooperation of community. Okay, the police should build trust and work with the community, and then avoid, and then the use of reasonable force when persuasion is not sufficient. Okay. Force may be used only when persuasion fails and it is necessary. Okay, the impartial enforcement of law. Police must apply the law fairly to everyone. Then the community is the police. Okay, the community is the police. The police and the community should work together to ensure safety. And then police should not usurp judicial powers. Okay, the police must enforce the law but not act as judges. Reduction of crime and disorder. The police should focus on lowering crimes and maintaining public safety. And then the last, the rules of enforcement impartially observed. And then all laws and rules should be applied impartially. Okay, and now we move to lesson 7, titled A Code of Professional Conduct and Ethical Standards. First, we have the neglect of duty or nonfeasance. Yeah, okay, it is failing to do a duty that is required by law or regulations which can endanger the public or harm justice. And then the irregularities in the performance of duty or misfeasance. Okay, performing a duty incorrectly, carelessly, or against the standard procedures. And then the malfeasance. Malfeasance, it is a committing a wrongful or illegal act while holding a position of authority. And then misconduct. Okay, it is the any behavior of police officer that is unethical, improper, or against rule. And incompetence. It is the lack of skills, knowledge, or judgment, or properly perform responsibilities. Apprehension. It is the using official power to unfairly harm, intimidate, or control others. And then dishonesty. Dishonesty, it is the deceiving, lying, or withholding the truth in official duties. And then disloyalty to the government. It is the acting against government interests or betraying the public trust. And then violation of law. It is the breaking laws, regulations, or official orders. Corruption. Misusing power for personal gain, such as accepting money, gifts, or favors. Next. Okay. Next, case fixing. Okay, case fixing. It is the most types of the corruption in the PNP. Okay, case fixing. It is manipulating investigations or court cases to benefit certain people. Then next, the bribery. Okay, it is the offering, giving, receiving, or soliciting something of value to influence actions. And then the extortion. Okay, extortion. It is forcing someone to give money, property, or favors through threats or intimidation. Okay, next, protection. Okay, it is shielding criminals or illegal activities from investigation or punishment. And then recycling. Recycling. It is repeating unethical practices or using old corrupt methods repeatedly. And then selective enforcement. Okay, selective enforcement, favoring some people or groups in enforcing the law while ignoring others. And then internal payoffs. Okay, internal payoffs. It is giving rewards, promotions, or beliefs with the benefits that it is the promotions or beliefs with the organization for personal gain. And then the favoritism. It is granting special treatment for advantages to friends, family, or allies. Okay, police officer's creed. A police officer's creed. A police officer must follow the values of honesty, duty, and service. Okay, the PNP image. PNP image. police must maintain a positive and trustworthy public image. And then we have a career management. Career management, the key to professionalism. Okay, it is effective. It is an effective leadership. Leadership ensures discipline, efficiency, and ethical behavior. And then the equality in the service. Equality in the service. All personnel must be treated fairly and equally. Okay, we have the delicadeza. Officers must act with tact, discretion, and moral sensitivity. Okay, police lifestyle. Police should lead a disciplined and more morally upright life. And then police patronage. Officers must avoid favoritism and political influence in their duties. And then next, the human rights. Okay, police must respect and protect the right of the individuals. And setting example, officers should model ethical behavior for their colleagues and the community, of course. And then the integrity. Okay, integrity officers must act honestly and uphold moral principles. And then respect for human rights. Respect for human rights, that they treat every person with dignity and fairness. And then professionalism. Okay, professionalism performs duties competently, ethically, and responsibly. Next, the impartiality. Okay, impartiality. Where are we? Impartiality. It is the applied law and policies fairly without favoritism or bias. And then accountability. Accountability. The officers must answer for their actions and decisions. And then confidentiality. Protects sensitive information obtained in the course of duty. And then courtesy and respect. Courtesy and respect treats all individuals politely and respectfully. Lawful orders. Follow and enforce lawful instructions properly. And then the community relations. It is to build trust and cooperations with the community. And then the prohibition of discrimination. Okay, avoid unfair treatment based on race, their religion, their gender, or status. And then prohibition of corruption. Okay, came again and again, the prohibition of corruption. Do not engage in bribery, fraud, or misuse of authority. And then the use of force. The officers should not use force, and use force only when necessary, reasonable, and lawful. And that's how I end my discussion. Thank you for listening.